For our viewers who are not familiar with you, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
My name is Jeremy Sylestine. I've lived here in Travis County for the second time since 2006. I was here for undergrad at UT from 1997 to 2000. I grew up in East Texas. I'm a member of the Alabama Coshada tribe of Texas over there. And first generation college graduate. I went on to law school at the University of Virginia, moved back to Texas after that and worked as a public defender in the Panhandle, and then moved back to Austin in 2006 to work for the DA's office, where I stayed for about 15 years, just over 15 years. And since December of 21, I've been running my own private practice in criminal defense.
Let's talk about, you stayed at the DA's office for a considerable amount of time, and then you decided to leave. Why was it that you decided to leave?
There were a number of reasons. Primarily, to be honest with you, I thought I was going to retire there. That became my professional home, and I had lots of friends and colleagues who I cared very deeply about. But on top of that was the mission of the office and what it stood for and the good that we were doing in Travis County. I really took that seriously, and to leave when I did was very hard. But when I saw the way things were going in terms of the policies that were being pursued and the resources that were being moved away from our ability to do a good job, it just became unsustainable for me and several others. Many of my colleagues left during that time. I stayed on as long as I could.
So let's talk about today and why you're running. Why are you running to be the DA?
I mean, if I had to just boil it down to a single sentence, it's because we can do better than what's being done right now. Criminal justice is a complicated thing, and it takes many shapes and forms. But in Travis County, I've seen what that looks like up close and personal for 15 plus years. I've spoken to juries over 75 times here in the county, and I know generally what their values are and how they view cases. And to see what started taking place in 2021 and thereafter, it just doesn't line up with what I know Travis County cares about. And I think that there needs to be a reset to something that is more balanced and more pragmatic and common sense, because right now it's more about political promises and policies that aren't in line with what the criminal justice system and what a prosecutor should be focused on.
So let's talk about that, because DA José Garza was elected in 2020 really on the heels of a movement to fight racial injustice and to have more police accountability. And so he ran saying, really he was going to tackle those things and put some policies in place. You were there for some of that in the beginning. Are there any policies that were put in place that you agreed with or agree with and would continue if you are elected to be DA?
Yeah, I want to put a pin in the police accountability part because I think that's so important. But in terms of other policies and things that are in place, mental health diversion, drug courts, veterans court, those are all wonderful things that we need to be celebrating and pushing more toward. What I'll say about that is that they existed before José Garza got there. And there's been a lot of credit taken for the fact that those programs are flourishing, but they existed before he did that. It's not a new idea for him. That, I think, is something that we need to continue focusing on and increasing the scope of them, because they are successful and necessary, and we know that those are some of the biggest drivers of people who find themselves back in the system over and over again. So if we can provide that on-ramp to services and resources through those programs, by all means, let's do that. That's piece number one. The police accountability part, I think, has been a failure of his office. And I look at those political cases that he brought. He promised, like you said, he promised to bring those cases rising out of the protests in May of 2020. And that was really a promise made without looking at any of the evidence. Before he got there, we were in that office looking at those cases and trying to figure out if there was any sort of criminal liability there. It was a very serious matter. Some of them were horrifying to look at. But in the end, it really comes down to what you can and can't prove. So to come in and immediately promise that and then get 21 indictments, 17 of which have now been dismissed, tells me that he's ineffective in his ability to evaluate the evidence and pursue those as a prosecutor should, which is with a mind toward what can I or can I not prove.
Okay, so since we're on the police accountability, and since we're talking about that, but we saw the internal report from APD that came out that says they did know, and there was information known up the chain where there was information and supervisors knew of the danger of those rounds, those munitions, and they were not taken off of, officers still had them. So you don't think that that was maybe something that was missed prior to him coming in?
I don't, and the reason I don't think that is because I knew it in December of 2020. I was working on one of those cases in particular, and the expired rounds was not a new fact in January of 2021. We knew that then, and he either knew or should have known that before. He's using it as an excuse to dismiss those cases now.
Okay. I want to go back to the original question because you mentioned a few of the programs that, as you mentioned, were already in place.
Right.
But are there any policies that he put in place that you think are working?
Man, I mean, I do like to give credit where it's due, but I'm not seeing a lot that's working functionally. And a lot of it is less policy and more personnel. The fact that he's run off so many prosecutors who had experience, and at that level, I'm going to be frank with you, it's very necessary. You can't have inexperienced lawyers come in and work on felony level cases because they are of the utmost importance. The difference in the county and district system is that county cases deal with misdemeanors, things you can go to jail for, whereas on the felony side, these are things you can go to prison for. And at that level, we need to have people who know what they're doing, who have the right training and mentorship. And when all of those people left with decades of experience under their belts, that mentorship and that movement toward an experienced and knowledge-based prosecution system walked out the door with them.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would disagree with you that there is value in people who have experience in an office. I do think that we saw a clear message from the majority of Travis County voters in 2020 who said the way that things were being done is not how we want to see things continue to be done. You're running saying that you want to see a reset. You want to go back to some of the old ways. How does that communicate with voters who say they want something new?
I wouldn't say that I want to go back to the old ways. What I think is that there has to be a reprioritizing of how we're going to do it, and that we need to do it with expertise. There is a common thread that prosecution in the criminal justice system should be about balance and smart people making good decisions. And the way we do that is by having people who are expert in the field in those positions where they're making those decisions every day. What I have seen as a defense attorney now on this side of things is that those things are being inexpertly done. And that is not a unique criticism. It's one that we are seeing in the results of cases that are coming out and in the stories that survivors of violence and victims of violence are telling us.
Yeah. Are there crimes that you think should be being prosecuted or other things that you think should be handled differently that you just don't see that happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, in particular, the domestic violence stories that we're highlighting through the campaign, those are real people who have suffered not just the crime that they went through, but also at the hands of the DA's office when they've either been ignored, left out, or otherwise betrayed by the plea bargaining process. And that is actually happening. We're not making these things up. These are people who are finding us and saying, I have a real grievance against that office, and I want you to tell this story to the public.
And that, I would imagine, is really hits home for you because you used to prosecute those domestic before you moved up to major crimes in the DA's office. You prosecuted those.
Yeah, I did for 7.5 years, child abuse and domestic violence in what was then called the Family Justice Division. And it was a unique opportunity because they're just such specialized cases. And the victims and survivors in those cases are so vulnerable and sometimes helpless. It really needs somebody who knows what they're doing to step in and make their case for them.
Yeah. You know, earlier this week, in fact, there was a group of Democratic elected officials who sent you a letter. They also sent it to all of us, calling on you to renounce campaign donations from donors who are Republican donors, and by that they mean people who have donated to other major Republican campaigns. And they also called on you to stop using, quote, Republican talking points and attacks in your campaign. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'll deal with the Republican talking points and attacks first because I just don't think that's true. And I guess if telling the stories of survivors of violence and reading the data and looking at specific cases, if that's a Republican talking point, I guess I'm missing the message because that is what is happening. That's what we're seeing in the documents that come out of the courts and the stories that we're being told by people who have experienced these things and want to come forward and tell their stories. So that's that part of it. As to the donor base, I'll say this. People in Travis County who are the majority of my donors are from all across the political spectrum. And you can go in and pick and choose anybody and say that they have given to this person or they've given to that person. But no one is sitting here telling me to say anything different than what my message is. And that is smart, common sense prosecution that has a balance to the system. And what we are seeing right now is a system that's out of balance. And people know very explicitly that the winner of this race in the Democratic primary will be the DA. There's a Republican challenger, but that Republican challenger doesn't stand a chance come November. So the real change happens now, and I am giving a message that people can believe in that will restore balance and integrity back to that office.
Is there something you want to say, though, to the people who are voting in the Democratic primary so that they can feel assured that you are truly a Democrat?
Yeah, people, if they want to be, will be assured. People may not be assured at all. But what I can say is that I've been voting Democratic my entire voting life. The very first time that I voted was in Bush v. Gore in 2000. And that was a big deal and very meaningful for me. But all of my beliefs stem from my upbringing and what I have seen over the years. And none of that's changed. I live in Austin on purpose. I live in Travis County on purpose because I believe in what Travis County citizens believe in. And if that were anything different, it would be glaringly obvious. If I have a more moderate position, I don't think that's something that needs to be punished. I am like many others in not just Travis County, but the United States who believe that we can live in the middle and we can also hold those independent thoughts in our head that we can believe in progressive principles and reform in the system while still believing in law and order.
Yeah. You've mentioned common sense prosecution. What does that look like practically?
I think we don't have to give up on the idea that there are cases where people have to go to prison. And I know that's an unpopular take in the José Garza camp, but it's true. And the way we know it's true is what juries have told us. There are several cases that even his administration has brought, taken to trial, and at the end of it, there is a prison sentence waiting for the defendant if they're convicted. That is not necessarily wrong. Now, how we go about that and the methods we pursue to get there, maybe that's something we can talk about and doing it better and smarter. But I don't think giving up on the idea that the community can speak into a case and tell us what it's worth is of little value. And that's what I see coming out of his campaign and his office.
So let's talk about what it would look like, how the DA's office would look if you are elected. Day one, what are you doing?
Well, one thing I want to do is reestablish the intake unit. And I've said this a lot on the trail, but there are thousands of cases, at last count close to 6,700 cases that are unindicted and just sitting there waiting for someone to do something with it. What I know is the intake division, as it was established before, gave the prosecutor's office a chance to triage cases, make them better, take input back to the investigating agencies and say, we need this, this, and this before we move forward with the case. That's not happening now because he's established a vertical model that really increases the caseloads on the prosecutors to an insurmountable level. Whereas I might have had 150 to 200 cases that I was responsible for, now under the Garza administration, I'm looking at 350 to 400. And that is an impossible caseload to manage because each one of those represents a specific victim, a specific defendant, and circumstances that you have to go in and investigate. And if I am not able to get to these cases and I'm focusing on my trial work, somebody is getting lost in the mix, and that somebody is a victim or a survivor of abuse. Now, what I also know is that backlog and the concentration that's missing from those cases results in harm. And the way we know that is there are specific cases where deadlines have been missed. This gets a little bit in the weeds, but there are timelines that go into effect as soon as somebody gets arrested. So day one, a person gets arrested. The DA has 90 days to get that case before a grand jury and indicted or not indicted. And during that time, if the DA misses it, the person then becomes entitled to a lower bond. When that happens, even in a violent case, there's nothing a judge or the DA can do about it. That bond gets granted, that person gets out. And in the case of Hilario Adrian, who has been reported on, that resulted in the murder of a Travis County citizen. And that's the kind of thing that doesn't have to happen. So what I'm seeing there is the combination of bad policy and ineptitude from the top down.
There are certain types of crimes that DA Garza has committed to not pursuing. Are there crimes that you would make that same commitment to not pursuing?
What do you mean?
I mean, when we're talking about abortion cases in Texas, when we're talking about some of the things related to marijuana.
Yeah, I don't see Travis County citizens or even myself being concerned about that. That's not something that's going to be pursued in Travis County.
Okay. Are there any final thoughts you would like to give our viewers about why they should elect you this March?
What we're seeing and feeling in Travis County is very real. The results speak for themselves. The victim stories speak for themselves. And the feeling that we get when we go downtown, for example, is a real feeling that we have to pay attention to. And I'm tapped into all of that. Not only have I heard it, but I feel it myself living here. I'm raising my family here, and I want it to be a safe community, not just for me, but for everyone else, because I'm bought in here. And what I know is that the Democratic nominee is going to be whoever is the guy in November. That's true. What I'm bringing to the table is the experience, the relationships, the expertise, and a proven track record of actually having prosecuted felonies in Travis County. And I want people to walk away knowing this, that it's okay to be a Democrat and be in a moderate position. There's nothing wrong with that. There are several people who live in this community who believe in those principles and still want to feel safe, and they want a law and order DA. And that's just not what we bargained for in 2020. We may have elected him then, but what we got as a result is not what we thought we were going to get.